Right now, we'd like to talk about how dictators use dishonest elections to gain power and also to maintain power. Okay, here's I have a poster over here. Here's a little photo of that poster. But this is Mao Zedong and a group of other Chinese leaders. And notice that they're all, what are they doing? Why, they're all casting a ballot. That's funny. I thought he ruled China with an iron fist. Why does he need to cast a ballot? Here's a very good book if you're into this. They're a little expensive for the small paperback that it is, but if you're into studying dishonest elections, this is called Voting for Hitler and Stalin. This is the English translation that came out in 2011. I bought one within months after this was released. Picture. You probably can't see it. People in the front might be able to recognize Joseph Stalin. He's got a ballot in his hand. Why? Because he's voting. Stalin? Voting? I thought he ruled Russia or Soviet Union with an iron fist. Inside some of these newspaper articles that I've used for the references into here, we have Adolf Hitler one day on an election day. Guess what he was doing? He was casting a ballot. What the heck is going on here? These strongmen need to cast a ballot? I don't understand. Well, first thing we want to talk about is dictators. We have a tendency to think of dictators in terms of their physical force that they use. And they are nasty physically. They go ahead and they arrest people, detain them without trial, execute people without trial, execute them with mockery of justice trials. But you'll find that that's usually used when the psychological tricks don't work. You see, the first thing that, like dictators, they have a number of psychological means. They want to control you psychologically. When that doesn't work, then we go for the physical. Okay, a deception of protection. They propagandize the police. They really try to get into the police heads that you are somehow maybe an enemy. I mean, just constantly, using a little Pavlovian type psychology. News media is either owned or controlled by the state. They have government control over the schools, so they control what goes into the heads of the young people, also a little bit in the adults. But also, and this is probably one of the least discussed areas of the aspects of how dictators do things, they also use dishonest elections for the psychological effects, as well as for legitimizing power and such things. So why do they even bother holding an election? All right, well, first they legitimize power. You ask Adolf Hitler. Why, he'd say, well, we run elections. And the people agree with me 99%. I'm not a dictator. I'm just doing what the people want me to do. That's his legitimacy statement. We might find a few criticisms of that within the next half hour. Elections are very handy for identifying the opposition. See, it's when you have your opponent and you let it look like maybe your opponent is going to do something, maybe accomplish something. He'll start bringing people out of the woodwork. In the meantime, the dictator sends moles, agents into the opposing campaign. And in the opposing campaign, he starts learning, well, who are these people who are my opponents? And that's all this agent does, is he's there to pretend that he's one of these opposing guys. Meantime, he's spying on them and finding out who's an opponent to the dictator. And then they're spreading the defeatism and the despair. This is the psychological warfare aspect of it. Imagine yourself as a German citizen at the end of the day at one of Adolf Hitler's 99% victories. You've been to the polls. You've seen the intimidation. You've seen the ballots. And we're going to look at some of these ballots. And you realize, good grief, even if I vote no, what am I doing? And then you find out that, but you know that Adolf Hitler's going to cheat because you asked, maybe, can I watch them count the votes? And they're going to say, you can get arrested for trying to watch us count the votes. So you're starting to feel a little bit bad. You seek the refuge of your own home, and then what happens? Oh, by the way, all day long there have been demonstrations in the streets. Bands have been playing. Now the trucks with the loudspeakers are driving down the streets. And unless you live in a rural area, you can probably hear the trucks driving down the streets with the Hitler Youth Corps cheering every time the loudspeakers on the trucks announce the results. Oh yeah. Let me know when you start feeling a little bad, okay? at some point in here, that's the point. I want you to feel desperate. I want you to feel like you're helpless. I want you to feel like there's nothing you can do. That's the way, I'm quoting Adolf Hitler, of course. I hope you don't. All right. So what are some of the priorities? How do we get this thing? How do we get this thing? Well, when he's taking the first control, he's got two primary purposes. First, I got to rig the current election, and then I have to gain control over the process because I want to win every other one in the future, too. Okay, so that's the top priorities. Once he's achieved that, once he's also got the takeover, once all the power is his, the people have no guns, their votes, they either have no votes or the votes are meaningless. Now I'm going to use it for the psychological warfare purposes, things like I had mentioned earlier. Well, how do they rig the elections? And this is important too, because we're going to go into this and we're going to compare what American elections were like during the time of Hitler and Stalin, compare them to the elections of Hitler and Stalin, and then we're going to look at the elections of today and see how much more we are like Hitler and Stalin than we are like our own elections 70 years ago. So, the dictator has the ability to schedule or reschedule any election anytime he wants. Whenever it's to his advantage to reschedule an election. He gets to design the ballots. He gets to put what's on there, and we'll find out. We'll take a look at what Hitler put on some of these ballots. He gets to rewrite the rules whenever he wants. He gets behind closed door vote counts. Count the votes behind closed doors. Trust me, have I ever lied to you? If you say yes, you go to a concentration camp. Oh, okay. And then behind closed doors vote totals. We're also going to deny ballot access to our opposition. You want to run against me, I'll make sure you don't get on the ballot. That always helps. We're going to have government regulation of political activity. And the government is going to define what is political activity. Think about that. We'll get into that a little too. And we'll do a little intimidation of candidates, a little intimidation of voters, a little psychology on the people. But we always hold elections, and I always win, and the people love me. See? I'm not a bad guy. Well, let's look at Nazi Germany. I'm going to make the statement that I think it's probably the best documented dictatorial takeover in all history. And the German newspapers were muzzled. They were muzzled already by the Reichstag fire decree. You were not allowed to say anything contemptuous about the government. What was the Nazi definition of the word contemptuous? Any criticism of Adolf Hitler was considered a contemptuous thing to do. So the Nazi newspapers were muzzled. I was joking about this. I was talking to a professor of German history a little over a year ago while I was writing the article on the 75th anniversary of the Anschluss election. I was discussing this with a professor of German history, and I was only joking. And I said, you know, what's the best language to know if you want to study the vote frauds under Adolf Hitler? And he says, oh, I don't know. I said, English. And the reason is because the American, we have lots of Americans who were of German descent, not just here in Wisconsin, also in the Northeast, even in Texas, other places like that. And many of our reporters that we sent to Germany to be the reporters for our newspapers spoke German fluently. So they understood what was going on. They had a market for the news. They said, go ahead and print it. And one of the things that we will be discussing today is how the American newspapers were printing doubts about some of these election results the very next day. And we'll be talking about that here too. Well, let's take a look at the Nazi elections. Well, Adolf Hitler started like an amateur here. This was on March the 5th of 1933. In the Reichstag election, he got 44, the Nazi Party got 44% of the vote. Okay. This actually is a ballot that was used in that election. They got 44%, but as you see, right after that, they jumped right up into the 90s. Right after that. Why, there must have been something lovable about Adolf Hitler, or maybe there was something about the way he ran his elections. I'm not sure. Let's see. So, let's talk about the ballot design. What happens when you let Adolf Hitler design the ballots for your election? What happens? Well, we can find out. Fortunately, I've actually purchased a number of them. They're all collector's items, and I'm going to share them with you. See this one on March the 5th, 1933? There are 27 circles, 27 blocks. They're all the same size. This is actually a fair ballot. Now, there's a democracy element in the in this parliamentary kind of government, and as members of the John Birch Society, and in case you're not a member, ask a Bircher here, this is a republic, not a democracy. Let's keep it that way. But in any case, back to the ballot. That's a pretty fair ballot. That's why they got 44%. But that's okay. We're going to let Hitler keep doing this, all right? November the 12th, 1933. We're going to have a vote about, we're only going to vote about the topic, all right, to leave the League of Nations. Well, you know, that's not really all bad. It's sort of like get us out of the UN, really, when you think about it. Here's the ballot. Okay, you can see it pretty well from there. You get about 7 or 8 paragraphs of Adolf Hitler telling you why you should vote yes. That's ja, as opposed to nein, which means no. Ja oder nein. Okay. You got about 7 or 8 paragraphs of telling you why you ought to vote yes. And then, as this ballot was marked, yes. Okay. Well, let's see. What else happened that day? The same day they had another election. They held 2 elections on the same day. This is your chance to vote for Adolf Hitler to be the chancellor. And let's see, who else is there? Frick is there. Hess, Goering, Goebbels. Oh, yeah. Now, Wagner and Wahl are a couple local candidates. This is the real thing. This is on the ballot. What happened to those other 26 circles? What happened to the and squares associated with them? Well, that's what happens, you know, when you let Adolf Hitler be in charge of running your elections. So notice also that you can't even do a write-in ballot. You can't even do a write-in. So how many votes do you think Hitler got this time? Huh? It depends on how you count them. Oh, darn. In terms of the votes that were counted, he got 100%. In terms of all the ballots, if you look at the spoil ballots, he got 92%, 92.2%. That's what I have in my calculations. You mean 8% of the people could mark that wrong? Well, the New York Times even had a little statement in there saying, we think there's about 8% of the people here who are trying to protest in any way they can. And so that's what happens when you let Adolf Hitler design your ballots. Okay. This next one is the Anschluss election. Now, in this one over here, Adolf Hitler gave you a choice of yes or no. Oh, thank you, Adolf. You're so sweet. Of course, he also lets you know which one is the bigger circle, and right in the middle, he has the little smaller one off to the side. Oh, and by the way, when you went to vote, there were reports from the voting of the people. Some of them actually got to see. I think some of the reporters did get to see. But by this time, already, they were using the behind closed doors, everything, even behind closed doors for the balloting in many cases. It was at the whim of the people who ran the election that day as to whether or not you could even walk in. If you're a voter, you could walk in, but other than that, get out of here. You're not allowed to watch us anymore. But anyway, they'd have a Nazi official sitting there, and there would be 2 privacy booths, one on each side. Okay. Oh, they have wooden sides? Well, the side where it's close to the Nazi voting official who's watching you, they had it partially cut away so he could actually watch you as you marked your ballot. And it was very easy to see. Now, we have to have the whole story here. We have to listen to Adolf, though. According to Adolf, he was very happy with the results, with the 99% that he got. A little background on this election. Kurt Schuschnigg was the Chancellor of Austria. And Adolf Hitler invited him to Berchtesgaden, and that's where Adolf Hitler successfully intimidated Schuschnigg into agreeing to the idea that Austria should become part of Germany, should be annexed by Germany, the Anschluss. Well, Schuschnigg was intimidated, and then he got back to Austria, and he devised a little scheme where he would outthink Adolf Hitler. It's never seen that advertisement, it's not nice to fool with Mother Nature. It's not nice to fool with Adolf Hitler either. So he did on Wednesday, I think it was March the 9th of 1938, he announced that he says, Hitler would like to, make us part of the Third Reich. Why don't we have an election? He's going to call the election. Oh, and he's calling it for that Sunday, like 4 days away. He also said that nobody who was born after December 31st of 1914 could vote. He just declared that. And it was because Hitler had been working with the younger people. And it looked at that, now it's going to be a shoo-in. The people are going to vote no. And this is going to give Schuschnigg the ability to say to Hitler, hey, that was, an idea of yours. We understand it, but the people really don't want it. And he knew that would not be okay with Hitler. One of the things we'll go over next in here is once Hitler started achieving those 90% wins, he got mad when he got only 90%. So he knew that with this would be his way of combating Adolf Hitler's, use of elections to do this sort of thing. Well, remember what I said earlier. It's when the psychological techniques fail, what does the dictator do then? He gets physical. Can you believe that within a couple days, the German army invaded and took over Austria? And you ought to read the newspaper reports. Go to your local library and go read these newspaper reports starting on March the 10th, and just read for the next few days. And this is good for a laugh here. One of the reasons why Hitler invaded Austria was because he wanted to make sure they ran it as an honest election. That guy's all heart. Gets me right here. It really does. But then, if you also read those same newspapers for about the next month, you'll also find out that the newspaper reporters were reporting the controls that were put on them. All of a sudden, in order to use long-distance telephones, they had to go to special offices. Now, telephone technology was very different then, too. But if they caught you speaking in any language other than German, and they did listen to you, you got disconnected. You had to speak in German so the Nazis could monitor what the press was saying. By this time already, remember how the Nazi press got muzzled right off the bat. The foreign correspondents by this time were also getting muzzled. They also were. So then finally Hitler rescheduled the election in order to make sure he could run an honest one. Of course, we understand that. Then when they had everything right, they had everything all set, then they held their election. So you see that power to reschedule an election just out of nowhere. They like that. So anyway, that was the Anschluss election. Same slide we looked at earlier. We're going to look at these next two. This is the one for Hitler becoming president and chancellor, and then the one after that is to invade the Rhineland, or to reoccupy the Rhineland, and to re-German it, to make it German again. What happened in this case, I got the one on Schuschnigg in here. Okay, I lost some of my notes. Oh, here they are over here. Sorry about that. Anyway, when it came to the election, this one was held, the one for Hitler to become the president and chancellor was held on August the 19th of 1934. Hitler endorsed by 9-1 is the headline in the New York Times. Okay. But 38 million people vote yes, 4.2 million vote no. And then in here, if I get the light a little bit better, we'll have it. It says, every appeal known to skillful politicians and with every argument to the contrary suppressed, they were asked to make their approval unanimous. Nevertheless, 90% of the voters have 10% of the voters have admittedly braved the plebiscite consequences by answering no, and nearly 1 million made their answers ineffective by spoiling their ballots. Yeah, Hitler reacted in anger simply because he only got 90%. And he started some crackdowns and all kinds of stuff. Well, what happened after that? Well, the next election that they held was on March 29, 1936. This was the one on the Rhineland. This is the one, for the very first time, Hitler really genuinely got 99%. That's because, and there were apparently no spoiled ballots, or well, whatever. There's a little dispute about the spoiled. There were a few spoiled ballots, or at least a few admitted. But this is the one when he started the behind closed doors vote counts, all the other things that he did. This is the New York Times for March the 30th. The next day, they talk about confusion causes the counting of blanks and other such things. You see, who was in charge of running the election? Goebbels, the Reich's propaganda minister. By this time, the propaganda ministry was in charge of running the elections in Germany. There ought to be a hint there. So anyway, what we now have, according to Goebbels, all other ballots, it was declared, especially all blank ballots, were counted as invalid and therefore as opposed to Hitler. That's the official pronouncement. What else does it say in the next paragraph? In Berlin and Frankfurt, for instance, election officials openly announced on direct inquiry that all blank ballots had been counted as votes for Hitler. Notice they said on inquiry. What did the reporter telling you? The reporters were not allowed to watch the vote counts. Already it was behind closed doors. And they're letting you know in the New York Times that we now had to ask people after the fact what happened inside. And we got two different stories. Maybe I'm not quite as impressed with that 99% now. I was really impressed. I tell you, it was just getting me. It was really choking me up. Anyway, well, maybe there might have been another American newspaper that sent reporters over there. Let's see what the Dallas Morning News had to say on March the 30th. Don't forget this day. The election was March the 29th, right? This is March the 30th, Dallas Morning News. You see, down here around the third paragraph, in this news story, we have a very interesting news article here. It says, in fact, the results were known long before the people even went to the polls. Burglars broke into the Ministry of Propaganda last week and stole the results. Front page, Dallas Morning News, March 30th. Like I said, Professor, maybe the best language to know when studying the frauds of Adolf Hitler's elections is English. At first I was only joking with him, and now I'm saying, well, let's throw it out and talk about it. Okay. Well, there's another guy that likes to run elections too, Joe Stalin. Oh man, there's a good guy. Well, maybe not quite as good. I mean, if you start studying Stalin's elections, they're very, very similar to Hitler's elections. Joseph Stalin has been attributed as having said as a public statement, it doesn't matter how they vote, all that matters is who counts them. That really has never been fully attributed, and in fact, I don't think it ever will be, because I don't think it ever happened. Not as a public statement, as a private statement. Because here's the reality. And this may be the source of how that came about. If you let Joseph Stalin specify your election procedures, then it won't matter how they vote. All that will matter is who counts them. That's what I'm saying. And I think that's probably where, and by the way, that is a truthful statement. If you, but we wouldn't want to. So Joseph Stalin actually encouraged people to vote. See, and I want to show you this. This is rare. I'm going to be very careful with it. This is actually, this thing right over here. This is a propaganda leaf pamphlet. I'm going to be very, very careful. Look at this. When you open it and close it, it actually appears as if you're putting a ballot into a ballot box. I mean, this is 1939 graphics. This is 1939 technology. But it's actually meant when you close it back up to... got to be real careful with this. Well, this is 75-year-old paper, and it was Soviet paper, too. But this was the kind of stuff he distributed to people to tell them to get involved in these elections. Now, this is kind of sideways in here. that's what's on the inside of this. And what it really says on the inside, I can't translate this, but we have a member of the John Birch Society who does translate these things. And every single word was in there. And it has a couple paragraphs of stuff, but what it really says is, vote for the party of Lenin and Stalin. Vote for the candidates of the communist and nonpartisan bloc. That's what it is. See, now Joseph Stalin, he never said my elections are frauds. He came out and said, boy, our elections are good. He was very convinced, or he tried to convince people his elections were good. Arthur Bliss Lane, U.S. Ambassador to Poland, wrote a book, I Saw Poland Betrayed. Many of the people who've been members of the John Birch Society for any length of time have heard of this book. Some of them have read it. This book it talks about a number of different aspects of how the communists took over Poland. But the final act was a sham election. There was a referendum election in June 1946, and there was an actual election on January the 19th of 1947. One of the things that Arthur Bliss Lane himself saw and reported was how some of those ballot boxes were taken uncounted and then taken to the district commissioner's headquarters to be counted. Ambassador Lane estimated 60% of the voters were members of the Polish Peasant Party. Those were the good guys in this election. There was lots of ballot confusion. When they ran the elections, the communists always got to be number 3, and the Polish Peasant Party might have been 1, might have been 2 over here, might have been 4 over there. They had a lot of confusion on the ballot. There was voter intimidation. Voters would keep track of any voter who cast a secret ballot. There was also candidate intimidation. Some leaders of the Polish Peasant Party were arrested. Some were even executed before the election even. This was all documented by the United States Ambassador. This book is available from the John Birch Society. I recommend it very highly. You don't have to read very far into it to see where he talks about elections right from the very start. Because if you look at the first sentence of the foreword on page VII, it says, following the elections of January 19th of 1947, I determined to resign my position as American ambassador. My mission to ensure that free and unfettered elections should be held had been a failure. It starts right off from the bat, he said. Now, there were other things besides elections that were in there, but that's part of Stalin's bag. That was part of Stalin's little bag of tricks. Well, that's okay. It can't happen here. Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about America in the 1930s and 1940s. That came out pretty well. Okay. The votes were counted in public. I don't know of any place in the 1930s and 1940s, this era that we're talking about, where you couldn't just walk on in and tell the people, hi, I'd like to watch the votes being counted. Hitler and Stalin, they went behind closed doors. How about the vote totaling? Well, that was all done in public too. Okay, behind closed doors. The vote counting was ruled by what? Law. Vote counting rules were modified at whim. Now, ballot access was already becoming difficult because the people trying to undermine our country were already working on that since the 1890s. But it was difficult or impossible already, so it was worse. Elections were scheduled by law. The other guys, elections were rescheduled at whim. Well, let's come forward to 2012. How many people here remember the Iowa caucuses? For president, yes. How many people remember that there was a false alarm about 2 weeks before the caucus from supposedly a group called Anonymous? Okay, Huffington Post on December 19th said, well, the GOP encouraged paper ballots instead of a show of hands in order to have a backup. Does that make sense? Are we so devoid of critical thinking that we can't see or question that statement anyway? One of the witnesses told me what the code phrase, encouraging paper ballots, meant. He was an attorney from the Chicago area. He belonged to the Ron Paul Club, full disclosure. He was a Ron Paul advocate. He went to Iowa, asked for permission to watch the votes be counted. He said no. You're not allowed to watch. That's it. Not going to let anybody watch. That's what happened. All right, it's almost like that story about Goebbels and the people who actually counted the votes. The official statement is one thing, the actuality is a little bit different. Same witness also told me there weren't any extra police there. If you were afraid of disruptors, why didn't you have a couple extra police officers hanging around? Oh, and the vote totals were accumulated in a secret location. As a writer for the New American, I contacted them saying, I'm a writer for the New American. I'd like to find out where they were and who the people were who were there to make sure that the vote count, that the vote totaling, everything was done right. Guess what? I don't know how many times I tried. They would not even tell me that. They would not even say that. If they're really afraid of disrupting this thing, why didn't they just encourage people to bring video cameras? Because the film would have captured the disruptors doing the disruptive acts. And that could have been used to help catch them and convict them, right? Arrest them and convict them. They could also reconstruct the show of hands votes. If the voters wanted privacy, all you had to say was the video recordings would be made from the rear. The video recordings of the hands going up will be made from the rear of the room. And then you could have gone up to the front at the very end, and you could say, my name is John Jones, I'm from Johnson County, precinct number 1, the vote totals are, and then if you live streamed those videos, how could the disruptor, if you had both a local copy on your own plus another copy, wouldn't that have defeated any disruption? That would have really been the right way to address disruption. What about Johnson County, Iowa? I went to the Republican National Convention in 2012 in August, and I just let it be known that there was somebody there that wanted to hear about anything that went wrong anywhere in any of the primaries or any of the caucuses. I met a woman from Johnson County, Iowa, and she told me a story, and then I called another guy, and he confirmed her story. They had a real disagreement in Johnson County, Iowa. A lot of college kids were involved in there, and the Ron Paul people said, and stood up to them, and said, you are not taking our votes behind closed doors until they're counted first. They said, no, we take them behind closed doors and count them for you. No, you're not taking them unless we count them first, then you can take them behind closed doors all you want. And they won. And so in Johnson County, Iowa, the votes were counted in front of the people who cast them before they were taken behind closed doors. It was a two-horse race between Romney and Ron Paul. And as you see, that's only, 160 votes or something in there, whatever. It was a fairly close, a two-horse race. How about Maine? Official results were Romney, Ron Paul were over here. Remember Washington County? How many people remember when the state DOP chairman said, you guys are going to get 2 or 3 inches of snow. We're canceling your caucus. Well, we're putting it ahead 1 week. You can't hold it this weekend. You have to go next weekend. And your votes won't count because by party rules, we have to have it done by a certain day. But of course, there were no party rules giving the chairman that authority, but there were the party was playing fast and loose with the rules. Okay, so all of Washington County, their votes just didn't count. By the way, just by coincidence, it was a Ron Paul area, one where Ron Paul was strong. But then what happened in Belfast, Maine? 22 voters attended the caucus. A pastor by the name of Matt McDonald was the chairman of it. 22 people showed up, and he said, by the way, the instructions are we're not allowed to count the votes in front of the people who cast them. How do you feel about it? They voted 22-0 to count their own ballots. Here's the actual vote totals. Ron Paul 8, Rick Santorum 7, Mitt Romney 5, undecided 2. Matt McDonald did something that they used to teach kids in our American government school systems to do, and that is to watch your vote and go all the way to where it's added up. Matt McDonald called the state party headquarters and he said, by the way, we noticed that you don't show our totals. I just want to be sure you got them. They said, oh, it's only 22 votes, who cares? He said, well, what do you have? And they said, oh, Mitt Romney won with 9. Rick Santorum had 5. Ron Paul had 2. And you might have seen this on YouTube. I also got to interview him, and I've even got a taped, with his permission, taped an interview over the telephone with him as he explained it again to me. Anyway, at this point, he said, we have 22 witnesses that the vote count was actually this 8, 7, 5, and 2. Up till then, it was always, it's only 22 votes, you people don't matter, why are you bothering us? As soon as he said all 22 of us watched and counted our own votes in front of each other. She said, you weren't supposed to do that. All of a sudden, 22 people meant something. If you can watch your vote being counted, I guess you're more important than people who can't. You know, that may be. So it's not happening here. I'm glad to hear that. Well, it can't happen here. Let's go back to that same slide that we looked at. Okay, votes were counted in public. Today, how many of you people here have not yet voted in this primary that's being held today? Hey, when you go vote, hopefully you're going to be voting. Just ask. Don't go too far. You don't want to get arrested. You don't want to make the... But ask, hey, can I come back tonight and watch you people count them? Just ask. You're going to be told no, probably. Say, oh, you've got to go through all these hoops and things like that. You've got to go through it. All right. Another way of taking the vote count out of the public's eyes is to do it electronically, where you can't watch electrons move. As people know, I'm the guy who was the original advocate of the paper trail movement, and you have to have that. But how about the vote totaling in public? Look at what happened in Iowa and in Maine. I contacted both Iowa and Maine Republican parties after those caucuses were over, and they were still not willing to tell me who was there, where they accumulated the votes, and who were the people that made sure it was fair and honest. They just stonewalled me. But this is also happening to our votes now, too. Vote counting rules are governed by law. We're still fairly good there. We're getting a little shaky on some of them. Ballot access is sometimes difficult. Yes, they're becoming more and more difficult all the time. And in Texas, you can't even cast. You can cast a write-in, but the person has to register as a write-in, and you have to go through all kinds of hoops in order to do a write-in. And I tested their electronic equipment, and I voted for somebody who wasn't on their list of approved write-in candidates, because I was one of the people who got to test it. Fortunately, we had a couple good people in our government who said, hey, I'm going to let this guy Kurt get into this thing. I'll ask him. And guess what? It doesn't give you any warning message at all. It just totally ignores your vote. It just doesn't tell you that it ignored your vote. It just chews it up and says goodbye to it. Yeah. Elections are scheduled by law. Right now, we're still fairly good. We have a lot of other problems, but I might have noticed recently, it was a couple of years ago, the governor of North Carolina, I believe it was, asked for some kind of special permission to reschedule based on a number of different things like bad weather or whatever. We used to have ability to extend elections due to bad weather, but the idea of totally rescheduling it, let somebody do it, and especially they could do it in the case of even a false alarm threat of some sort. It can't happen here. It is happening here. But the good news is we still have time to turn it around. We still have time to turn it around. Well, what can I do? Obviously, here in the John Birch Society, we have a lot of educational programs. And I'm here to tell you, without any hesitation, the best thing you can do is join the John Birch Society, if you have not already. And if you are a member, I encourage you to just get more active. In 1986, when I spoke at Boston University, a major East Coast newspaper sent a reporter to that symposium where there were 6 presenters, of which I was one. He talked to 3 of the people that were big names. He missed one of the other big names. The 2 of us that were no names, I remember telling him, I said, hey, guess what my presentation is about? It's about this new technology coming about, and it's all electronic, and I think you need a paper trail. And he's there, well, thanks. And that was all. Okay, you can't push yourself on him. That Friday, August the 15th, 1986, that was at Boston University. I used to live in New Hampshire. I went by Belmont, Massachusetts, and I went to the office of a guy by the name of Gary Benoit, I think. And I went in and I explained to him, hey, guess what? I just got through with a 2-day symposium. To put you on the spot, Gary, but it's true. I don't know if you remember this day or not. You do. I remember it. I explained it to Gary. He says, He didn't play all the games like who's famous, who's not. He said, you have a point there. Let's write an article. And so we did. The very first publication in America to have something about the paper trail was the New American. All right? But there's a lot of good reasons to join the John Birch Society. The John Birch Society is just an excellent organization. Education is very important. Other people are going to tell you, get active, do things. That's okay too. You can get on the committee to elect the right person for the right office. But be a member of the John Birch Society also. John Birch Society is the only organization I know that also gives warnings about neutralizers and how the dangers of neutralizers. If more people in the pro-life movement were aware of what neutralizers were, they probably would have recognized the neutralizer attack that got those people to start doing that civil disobedience that then got out of hand. They never recovered. Today there's another neutralizer attack going into the Tea Party movement to try to convince people that we should have an Article 10 convention. To try to convince people that an Article 10 convention is not a constitutional convention. But you go to something like the John Birch Society, and you'll see what it's like to have an organization with thorough research to actually, so it's good to belong to a Tea Party group, but also the John Birch Society. It's good to be a pro-lifer, also the John Birch Society. And I think I've gone a little bit over my time. We have just a couple minutes still for questions before 1 o'clock. And if I want to...
Article 5.
Huh?
Article 5.
My apologies. I must have been hit by a neutralizer attack. So, you're right.
Say that again and I'll edit the video.
Okay, it's Article 5. It's the Article 5 convention, not an Article 10. My mistake. You're right. It's absolutely right. And they're trying to convince people that an Article 5 convention is somehow just a convention. If you have a convention under Article 5, it is a constitutional convention, whether you like it or not. Thank you. Yes, Rosamund.
That all the hoopla that Al Gore raised, when he narrowly lost the election a few years back, and all the doubt they cast on the votes and the ballots at that time, I saw that then as part of the left's attempt to undermine and make Americans lose faith in the electoral process. Would you agree with me?
Well, certainly there was that. There were other things, too, I'd like to tell you about. There's a man named Bill Salmon who wrote a book called At Any Cost. Now, there were about, I think it was like 900 votes that were somewhat questionable regarding whether they had hanging chads, partially removed chads, some of these other things. Guess what the news media wasn't telling you about? About the activities that there were to suppress the military vote. See, military is typically around 65 to 75% Republican. And if you read Bill Salmon's book, more votes were thrown out because they were military absentee ballots than there were votes that were under question because of the hanging chads. So, yes, you're right about what you said, but why did the news media just ignore one of them in Bill Salmon's book? I think it was 19 hours. They had a tag team of lawyers until the voting officials in Florida just gave up and said, okay, we won't count these ballots, we'll throw them out. Because these guys identified him as military. And that's in Bill Salmon's book, At Any Cost. I read it's very inexpensive right now. It's down to like $5-6, I think, and you can order it. And so, yes, you're right about that, but hey, look at how much truth how much was taken away to make half-truths, to make it look to a very distorted picture. Yes, sir.
Just to follow that up, I think we've all probably read where many of is it the state that's involved or the county clerks, they have to send out the ballots to the military. Mm-hmm. And what I've been reading over the last years, they send them out on purpose late so that they can't get back in time to be counted, in a timely fashion. So you got a number of things going on in the military. One, what she talked about, but this other one that I keep hearing about, I think is bigger.
I wrote an article for the New American a couple of years ago on our military ballots being suppressed. I think you'll find that you and I have a lot of agreement. And there's a man waving a copy of it. Yes, sir. I am aware of that. And yes. Are there any other? Yes, sir.
A couple questions.
Army you're wearing. Okay.
A couple questions concerning watching the vote. When working with the electronic voting machines, did they give off a tally for each ballot that is put in? And is that tally available to a voter watch?
Okay. Number
That's
one,
question one.
that's question number one. Can I answer that one first?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Some of the machines do, some of the machines don't. The question is, can you get to see them? The only reason why I get to see them in Denton County, Texas, is because I'm on the Denton County ballot board. I'm one of 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats who get to review the ballots. But you can't. But what's even more important is all I get to see is the electronic version of it. If it has been tampered with, and I'm not saying that I believe they are, or at least not in the Republican county where I am, in the Denton County. But it's still, even then, it could be tampered with before I see it. But the average person can't see it. And that's why you want a paper trail so that you can do an expert. Yes, sir. Next question.
Second question. As watching the vote, as a citizen, do I have the right to look at the voter roll where the people come in and sign in?
Now, it goes by state. That goes from state to state on that one.
How about here in Wisconsin?
I don't know the laws in Wisconsin for sure, but you can check with people here to ask and see what the law is. Most states, if you get to be, you have to qualify to be an observer to do it, and then some places they make you go through hoops. And last year at Thru the Vote, and I just gave it to our audiovisual people yesterday, I interviewed a woman from Hamilton County, Ohio, who jumped through all those hoops and got the people to sign so she could be an observer at the elections. And she found both the Republicans and the Democrats undermined her. She played it for us, the phone calls at the Thru the Vote, the phone calls that were on her tape recorder when she was gone, saying the Republican Party people, this is one of the Republican candidates who signed to let her, be a poll watcher, said, they've told me that if I don't revote my signature, they are going to demand money back that the party gave me. I'm going to have to pay them back with donation money unless they revoke that signature. And even the Republicans were undermining the ability of people to do that. Okay, so I would...
Okay, question number 3.
Well, there's some other questions too.
As a vote watcher, do I have the ability to stand in the voting place and watch as the people come in?
I believe you do. We check the law. This lady seems to know.
Well, if you agree with that, then I have a big problem in the city of Neenah. Because I was at Shattuck today to cast my vote, right across from my house. And I walked in and I asked if I could see a tally of the electronic vote. I was told absolutely not. I asked specifically if I could review the roll of the voters that had come in and voted so far. Absolutely not. I asked if I could stand and watch. They made a phone call to the city clerk, and I was told if I didn't leave after I vote, that they would call the police. This is what we have to fight here in America. I have no idea what's going on in the city of Neenah, and that's where I live, and I'm ticked off.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your comment. Is any other questions we would like to... Yes, sir. I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand earlier.
Well, counting the votes is one thing, but to me, presidential elections now are almost like voting for directors of Fortune 500 companies. You don't get to select who you vote for. And I think the Ron Paul episode with 2012 and not being able to speak at the convention and what you explained here as far as the process of selecting our candidates.
And we saw where the process itself, we now have circumstantial evidence anyway to say we think there's something wrong
So when
with
you
those
start talking
totals.
about 2 Bushes, Jeb Bush, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Chelsea Clinton as all potential candidates, it's our whole voting process has been corrupted by people at high levels in this country that we don't really, we think we're voting to make a difference, but we really don't.
Well, if the John Birch Society is an informational organization, Robert Welch said we are an educational army fighting with facts. Education is our only weapon. Education is our only strategy. Truth is our only weapon. What we need is if more people in the John Birch Society will spread the word on things, it won't be just the liberal news media that establishes what is talked about
But all
in the
media
news.
is corrupted. It's pretty much what the oligarchs want to be said.
If we have a stronger John Birch Society with more members, we will be able to overpower the news media. We can't right now because we don't have the members. But the John Birch Society has the strategies. The John Birch Society knows what to do. And what we need is more pullers at the oars to make it happen. So,
Some areas we do.
okay.
Some areas we do. I mean, members of the John Birch Society influence 10 people, who in turn influence 10. 500 Birchers in a congressional district, it's over from dog catcher to Congress. Just the way it is. Because of the educational efforts and activities. It's a done deal.
Repeat that?
Every member of the John Birch Society influences a minimum of 10 people, who in turn influence 10 more. So one member of the society statistically influences 100 votes. You get 500 members in a congressional district, it's all over, because we go around the media. And but at any rate, it's done all the time. Some people can't talk to their spouse. Anybody here? Other people influence hundreds. I give an award every year to the Bircher that influences at least 1 million people in and of his own influence. 3 years in a row I've been doing that. And they get out there and they produce the information and the knowledge and the more importantly the understanding necessary. And then the papers don't count. The TV doesn't count. The internet doesn't count after that. It's people organized doing the same thing at the same time to get the same information out. It works.
Well, thank you, folks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kurt.